Hello, I'm back again, this time to give you a quick little introduction on the story involving this fine gentleman here, which is called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Um, I'm going to give you a tiny bit of the origins of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight here. Going to save some of that, a decent amount of it, for the next story we're doing, the Canterbury Tales, and that'll make sense once we get there. But what I am going to tell you about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, first, it's from like 1375, 1400. Again, I can't really give you a great answer about who wrote it. The person who wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight goes by the name The Pearl Poet, only because there is another poem that we're pretty darn sure was written by the same person. That poem is called The Pearl, hence we get The Pearl Poet. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is technically a King Arthur story. You know, King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, Camelot, Merlin, Lancelot, all that stuff. Pretty famous. I say it's sort of a King Arthur story because King Arthur is in it for like a minute. Camelot is in it for like a minute. But the main part of the story is about Sir Gawain and obviously the Green Knight who's hanging out right here. Best guess is that there was a story about a Green Knight who gets beheaded that predated King Arthur, and this story of the Green Knight and the beheading and the going off in a year to get another chop at his head kind of got absorbed into the King Arthur legend, and characters from the King Arthur story were kind of inserted or superimposed on the original Green Knight story. That's our best guess. Not totally sure. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is actually a mix of a bunch of different kind of stories. You have games because getting your head chopped off and then returning the blow in a year is going to sound weird to call it that, but it's a game. It's a hellish, deadly game where people lose their heads, but it's a game, and game stories were kind of popular in the Middle Ages. It is also a romance, sort of, with what happens with Sir Gawain and the lady of the castle towards the end. It's a hunt story because while Sir Gawain is getting hit on by the lady of the castle, the man of the castle is out hunting animals. Hunt stories were kind of important. Hunts were something that the aristocracy, kings, and nobility went on for fun because there was nothing else to do. And it's a beheading story, and stories about beheading were super popular in the Dark Ages. But what I really, really want to get across about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight has to do with these things called chivalry and courtly love. Chivalry, you probably know about, is the code a knight lived by. Courtly love, I'll talk about in a second. But what we need to understand about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is where it fits in the whole movement from paganism to Christianity. Like I said, this is 1375, 1400. Substantially later than Beowulf, even if you use the most extreme date for when Beowulf was written. I said the most extreme date that probably almost nobody believes is 1100. Still, we're 300 years after that. And Britain has very much moved from paganism to Christianity. In fact, I would say it's pretty much all Christian at this point in time. There are a couple of pagan hangovers or pagan elements in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. I'll talk about that in my recap video later. But here's the thing. This is the super important thing. This is the big takeaway from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Yes, people were way more Christian now than they were around the time of Beowulf. The thing is, the world did not get was not that much better, was not that much easier to live in, was not that much less violent. It was still a nasty, brutal, and vicious world. Camelot's a fantasy. Camelot is an idealization. Camelot is not what life was like back in the Middle Ages. Camelot is a fantasy. It's made up. It's an imaginary, idealized place. Life was still brutal. Life was still vicious. Life was still hard. you still had knights who were trained killers. Knights were brutal. Knights were warriors. Knights were vicious. This idea of the noble knight who did the right thing and who followed the code of chivalry, that's a fantasy. Knights were warriors. Knights were soldiers. Knights were killers. So the problem is, how do you take that reality, the vicious, brutal reality of being a knight, and make that fit with a Christian world that is all about peace and doing the right thing and living a good life? Well, you develop something called the Code of Chivalry. The Code of Chivalry was supposed to be the code that a knight lived by. There's no like real hard and fast like definition of what chivalry is, but I can give you an idea of one of the most common codes of chivalry. A knight was supposed to live by friendship. He was supposed to be good and friendly towards people he met, friendship towards his fellow knights in his kingdom. A knight was supposed to be generous if he met a stranger or someone in need or someone in dire straits on the road. He was supposed to give his cloak, give his clothing, supposed to be generous with whatever he had, his food, his water, whatever, supposed to be generous to people he met. Was supposed to be follow the code of chastity, which means knights were not supposed to engage in sexual relations. Do you think that happened? Can tell you pretty much didn't. A knight was supposed to be courteous, bowing to people, shaking hands, being super polite. Okay, knights were supposed to follow piety, meaning being very religious, devoted to God, devoted to the church, devoted to religion. That was the code of chivalry a knight was supposed to live by. Supposed to be generous, supposed to be chaste, supposed to be devoted to God, supposed to be courteous, supposed to be friendly. Do you think most knights lived like that? Probably not. But by saying they did or giving them that code to aspire to, it was a way to make these knights, who were very much trained killers, violent, vicious people, it's a way to reconcile that, to make that lifestyle work with Christian ideals in the Dark Ages. Same thing with courtly love. This idea of courtly love was that a knight was supposed to devote himself to a lady, usually a lady of a higher station than him, like an aristocrat or royalty. And the idea was a knight was supposed to win battles in her honor, slay monsters in her honor. Not that there were monsters, but you know what I mean. Defeat other kingdoms and defeat other knights in her honor, for her glory, for her name. The relationship was never going to amount to anything because she was royal and he was a knight. It was never going to be consummated. It was never ever they were never going to hook up, but he did everything for her honor. Again, do you think that was reality? Do you think a knight never ever ever hooked up with a princess or a queen? Of course they did. That's reality. But this idea of courtly love, was supposed to make okay these feelings of lust and sexual desire that were very, very real and very, very human, but was supposed to put a nice, friendly face on them. Yes, there was this attraction between knights and royal women, but as long as it was never consummated, wink, wink, it was okay. That's the big takeaway from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This idea of chivalry, this nice Christian code a knight was supposed to live by. Putting a nice face on the violent reality of being a knight. Here's the thing, and this is why Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is important. It pokes holes in the idea of chivalry. It basically calls BS on chivalry. And what you're going to see when you read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is that chivalry works in Camelot when life is perfect and wonderful and there's nothing wrong. But when Sir Gawain gets thrown out into the real world, all of a sudden the ideals and the ideas of chivalry fall apart real fast. And that is what I'd like you guys to look for in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Enjoy it. It's an interesting story. It's a little bit of a weird story, and I will check back in with you guys in my recap of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.